Hi, everyone, and welcome to our final plenary of the National Bike Summit. I hope you've had a really great experience. Maybe you caught up with an old friend or made a new contact. Maybe you were able to share like a great story or something you're doing in your community, or maybe you learned from somebody else about something you want to bring back. Mostly, I hope you really feel energized by the people and the work that we've been able to talk about here. And I hope you can take that back to your community. But before you take it back to your community, I want you to bring it up to Capitol Hill tomorrow. And we've talked a lot over the last month about the logistics of how to lobby and how to set up your meeting. We've talked a lot about our specific asks, whether that be the side guards, the Langenkamp Safety Act, or the e-bike rebate. But I want to do something a little bit different tonight before you break into your state groups, which I want to talk or have a speaker come and talk about a different approach to how we handle those meetings. As I think most of you know, we have champions on both sides of the aisle, but our support is a little bit lopsided. And when we hear concerns about biking and walking and funding and what the role of biking and walking in transportation should be, it's often from the conservative side. And I think about this all the time. And honestly, I listen to a lot of podcasts of people across the spectrum to try to learn, how people with different positions talk about the same issues. So I was really excited. I don't know if it was last summer or last fall, I was listening to one of those podcasts where they have people on either side of the fence debating an issue. And at the end, they get to speak on something that they care about. And the conservative speaker decided to talk about bikeable and walkable communities. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to go reach out to him. So I did, and I asked him if he would come to the summit, and he said yes. So I'm really excited to have Timothy Carney here to speak. Tim Carney is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he works on economic competition, cronyism, civil society, localism, and religion in America. He's also a senior political columnist at the Washington Examiner and is on cable TV from Fox to MSNBC. And his latest book, Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse, is his most recent book from 2019. So Tim, thanks so much for being here, and I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Tim Carney, and I learned to ride a bike in Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village. I grew up, my dad was an antitrust attorney. My mom was a community organizer, even though that term didn't really exist back in the early 80s. But I had two liberal parents in Greenwich Village, and yet here I am at the conservative American Enterprise Institute, and I'm a columnist at the Washington Examiner, which is a conservative newspaper. My wife and I, we're Catholics. We send our 6 children to Catholic school. We go to mass at least once a week. And so if you're wondering how a kid grows up in Greenwich Village and becomes a conservative, I ask you to go back and watch the sitcom Family Ties. That Alex P. Keaton character was my oldest brother. Sort of Ronald Reagan was winning the Cold War, and Michael Dukakis was putting on a helmet and trying to look cool in a tank, and so it's pretty obvious what side we were going to take. But again, with my background, where I've grown up, I lived in Montgomery County for 15 years. I now live in the Northern Virginia suburbs. I've sometimes called myself a conservative who speaks liberal, and I suppose some of what I'm doing here is helping make sure bikeability, walkability advocates can speak conservative. So to do that, we have to think about the areas of overlap and the areas of divergence that might exist. The overlap is being everybody here, like a conservative, is pro-family, pro-child. Interestingly, more these days pro mom and pop family, mom and pop business versus big business. National corporations are increasingly something that a conservative isn't necessarily warm towards. The divergences, the two big ones I can think of are climate change is not going to carry a lot of weight as an argument for bikes, and B, if you sound anti-car, you are not going to get anywhere with conservatives. I was just talking to my brother who lives kind of rural Connecticut, but we grew up in Greenwich Village. He works from home. He said, I don't even drive, and I get upset if I think someone's trying to take away my car, which I don't even use. So it's a cultural issue, and that's something we have to think about. I'm going to do a quick visual demonstration of some of the differences here of the different ideas of bikeability. The sporty bike short guy isn't going to resonate with a conservative, and neither is, I Googled Dutch people commuting to work. I don't think that's going to be your positive selling point. Now, obviously, pictures of Ronald Reagan on a bike could help you, but more relevant, just a family activity. Absolutely family activity. That's what we're going to talk about. But more important than mom and dad and the kids, I'm going to talk about the kids without mom and dad. And yes, that is the opening scene from Stranger Things. And so you might have to worry about interdimensional demons attacking, but as long as that's not an issue, letting kids go on bikes is a big part of what I'm going to talk about, sort of free range parenting. This is important to us. My wife and I, we have 6 children. It is impossible for us to drive them everywhere. And so I'll get to that later. I want to start with the differences. I guess the first thing is, well, no, I'll start with that. It's very important for us to be able to let our kids run wild. This is incredibly liberating for parents. I had a conversation with a priest in my old parish, Catholic parish, when I lived in Maryland. And he was talking about the role of the parish. He said, we used to feed people and have Catholic youth organization, CYO sports. Now the government has all sorts of programs for feeding the hungry, and sports is taken over by kind of elite travel sports, unfortunately. So if we're going to provide something for these people, it's a very diverse parish, immigrants, native born, every continent, rich, poor, middle class. What does everybody in this Friday night fish fry need more of that we can provide them? And I said, frankly, we need more time that we're ignoring our children. Too much of their activities required us driving them there. Or even if it was within walking or biking distance, there was too much crossing a 6-lane road with inadequate crosswalks. There wasn't a bike trail there. There wasn't a walking trail there. The ability to let our kids go free, to be free-range parents, is absolutely crucial to being family friendly. So many parents today say parenting is harder today than it used to be. This is the next book I'm working on. I argue that it's actually led to fewer babies. This is something I care about. A lot of people I know care about the fact that the birth rate is so low in the US. And to me, that reflects that we are not a family friendly enough society. All sorts of reasons in that, but one is too much of the parents' time is spent shuttling the kids around. Too much of the parents' time is spent having to provide all the entertainment, all the transportation for a 12-year-old. So even if you want your kid driving a car when they're 16, there's going to be a lot of years there when they could be independent, but they don't have a car. And that really can be a winning issue for conservative, whether it's a congressman or somebody back home. Another way to look at it, though, is also that biking builds independence. One of the worries when we look at some of the political strife, when we look at college students, and conservatives say, wait, why can these college students not handle adversity? Why can they not handle somebody who disagrees with them? Well, more people, more children need time building independence. They need the work of overcoming their own adversity. Biking and walking, a community that's safer for that, will have more children to use, or fewer what used to be called snowflakes, frankly, more kids off on their own. As Generation X, again, that's what Stranger Things was about. Generation X, there was one of the things I've heard again and again in my current book on parenting is, well, we used to just leave on our bike, on foot, and mom would say, be home when the street lights start turning on. That's when you come home for dinner. There's a lot of conservative parents who would really like that kind of freedom. And then we talk about local businesses, mom and pop, downtown where people actually know each other. A strong local community is something that, frankly, in my experience, exists more in liberal places. This is one of the reasons that I've lived in Montgomery County or Fairfax County. I like growing up in Greenwich Village, but it's something conservatives really value. What I argued in my last book that Karen mentioned, Alienated America, was that the collapse of a local community causes people to put more of their emphasis, more of their seeking support, whether it be a safety net or modeling or anything like that. They put it in politics or they put it in a central government. That's unconservative. Stronger communities are very conservative, walkable, bikeable places. You're just more likely to bump into a neighbor than you are if you live in a world where everybody goes from their house to their attached garage to the shopping center that's 3 towns away. That is averse to local community, and it's good for big business in a way that's bad for mom and pops. And in fact, some of the best bicycle-friendly communities that the League of Bicyclists cite, I just noticed a couple that jumped out at me as silver or gold. St. George in Utah, that's actually featured in my next book as a very family-friendly city. Peachtree City in Georgia, the Villages in Florida, whether it's for families with young kids who want them to be able to run around, or 12-year-olds to drive a golf cart or whatever, or riding a bike around, and retirees. These are conservative places that really emphasize, where people pay premium to be able to have a life that is less dependent on cars. So that'll bring me now to the divergences. Again, climate change. I care about climate change. I want emissions to be as low as possible. I also know that it's just taken on a very politicized valence. If you're saying we need subsidies or we need this policy in order to reduce emissions, it sounds like special pleading to the conservative. We could debate whether that's right or wrong, but I'm telling you, that is how it's going to come across. The more important one, though, is do not be anti-car. Be pro-bicycle, be pro-walking, be pro-walkability, be pro-bike paths, etc., without being anti-car. The car, like a gun, frankly, has taken on a political symbolism. It is a totem. It is a cultural totem. And conservatives increasingly think that people are trying to take away their way of life. And for a lot of people, their truck, their car is part of their way of life. This isn't true for, you might be thinking of the rural white Trump voter. It's also true of a lot of immigrants into this country, that's what is freedom. That is the American dream, is buying your car, is owning your own car. That's true across races, from urban to rural. If you sound anti-car, you're going to turn off a lot of people. Different people have different ways of life. So for instance, again, we have 6 children. There's lots of great things we can do walking and biking. Walking in the woods, going for bike rides with a few of my kids at a time is definitely part of our life. But at one point I saw an article with a headline, "Make every day car-free day." No, that's not going to happen. I think I have one more slide here. And just, we live a life that is going to very regularly involve cars. So this is Sunday for the Carney family. And this is in the summer, so that's why my children aren't wearing ties. In the summer or even in the spring, we can't afford to live walking distance from our Catholic parish. And so all of us, the girls in their dresses, the boys in jacket and tie, are not going to bike. We're not going to walk to St. Andrews, St. James. We're going to rely on a car, especially if the next thing we're doing is going from there to grandma's house. And so the better way of putting it, which is the phrasing used more often, I see on the website, is ride more, bike less. I mean, ride more, drive less. That sort of, even that might be a little strong, but that general idea of, don't you want more of your life? Don't you want less of your life to be you shuttling people around? And so more walkability, more bikeability. You're creating options. You're not crowding out other things. And just in general, I coach baseball. That's part of my identity. I think it's in my Twitter bio as youth baseball coach. So I have buckets of baseballs in the trunk of my car. I remember reading an article saying, oh, nobody will need to own a car in the future. I'm thinking, where are we going to put all the stuff that we bring to the swimming pool? The towels, the little floaties for the little kids, the bag of goggles. Our minivan is going to be part of our life. So you shouldn't think of trying to eliminate that. When I read those articles, oh, you shouldn't need to own a car, or they're analogous articles, nobody needs a lawn. I'm thinking the editor editing this and the writer writing this just don't know children. It's really important to be very sensitive that a Republican member of Congress, when he thinks of his constituent, he's thinking of a married couple with 3 or 4 children. And so what is their daily, and a suburban one, frankly, too. What is their daily life like? You want to make those families' lives better, not pretend they don't exist, like some people accidentally fall into a trap of. Final point, and then to wrap it up, don't talk about Europe. It's the funniest thing that so many politicians say, well, we are the only ones who don't use a metric system. That was Lincoln Chafee was saying that. That's not going to work. To the degree that we're different from Europe, I'm thinking, well, yeah, we beat England in the American Revolution. We've beaten France, Spain, Germany. We've beaten all those countries, and we're better than. The jingoism in me makes it so that if you say, why can't we be more like Europe? It's not convincing. That's why I included the Dutch bicycle commuters. But you know what it is instead? It's an American thing of self-reliance, of different people with different lifestyles having choices to live it differently. Nobody's trying to take away your way of life. We're trying to help other people expand their way of life. So to be an American, a pro-family, a pro-mom and pop message that is not anti-car, that I think is the key to talking about walkability and bikeability when you're talking to conservatives.
All right, thank you so much for that. We've got a bunch of questions in the chat. One thing that we're hearing about a lot is inflation and the cost of living. And do you think that there's an economic argument we can make that if it's not going to no cars, maybe less car trips as necessary? Like,
yeah,
would be an argument that works.
I think it cuts both ways. One is that as a father of 6, there are ways in which a car is going to be the most efficient way to do a lot of things. For us, my kids love riding the metro into DC, but that's always like a special, like I take 1 or 2 kids to work. If we're going to a Nationals game, watching a Nationals baseball game, it's going to actually be cheaper for me to pay $15 for parking and whatever I'm paying in gas and to go back and forth. So that, again, it's a way to be sensitive about for some of us, it's much better for us to take a car than transit. But on the other hand, what I always think of, my brothers, when we were on a big family vacation, like, hey, we can do mini golf. I said, I can't afford mini golf. Anything that's per capita is too expensive for me. So a bike ride was the perfect sort of family outing, like a camping trip where it's, there are expenses, but absolutely the sensitivity to the expense of life does hit families more than individuals. And so I do think saying, parents need more opportunity to do stuff that doesn't cost money, and either letting the kids ride their bikes around the neighborhood or going for a family bike ride fits that bill.
Okay. So I think a lot of us in this here have made the mistake of looking to Europe and trying to use those examples. And, when I think of the places that have the highest bike rates, often thinking about big cities.
Mhm.
So how do we, when we're thinking about this, should we be thinking mostly, I think there's a quality of life issue we can bring up for suburban and
Yes.
rural, but do we need those examples of places, like you said, our bicycle friendly communities?
Yeah, so I mean, St. George, it's one of the places I really wanted to go for my book research and didn't get to make it there. But I met parents from other parts of Utah who said it is absolutely the best place in America to raise a kid. And again, a lot of it is you don't have to constantly shuttle people everywhere. I have a friend who grew up in Peachtree City, Georgia, and she similarly said, like, she hears Gen Xers say, well, we just ran around. And her millennial friends are like, we didn't get to run around. And she says, I did get to run around. That quality of life. Because again, for a lot of people, the American dream is I want to have a single family house with a yard in the suburbs. That requires that is exactly the sort of place where good bikeability and walkability infrastructure really matters. And so to focus on that is big. I have a brother, he's again one of my conservative older brothers, and he lived in New Paltz, New York, where there just happened to be really good bike trails because there used to be donkey trails, cart paths, and now he lives in rural Maine where there isn't. And my brother lives in rural Connecticut. He has to drive his kids to the baseball field, which is less than a mile away because there's not even sidewalks there. So it really is a quality of life thing. I mean, the idea of dropping his kids off at baseball when it's 3 miles, when it's less than a mile away, just is absolutely abhorrent to him, but he has to do it because there aren't sidewalks. So I think quality of life in rural and suburban places built around the family, not having to shuttle kids, not having to worry about them getting run over, that's really going to be a selling point, much more than thinking about commuting to work or the city bike paths.
And then we had a question about other people, like maybe you don't want to bike everywhere, not you in general don't want to bike everywhere. Like we have seen a transit campaign that was not all of us use it, but all of us need it, with the idea of getting workers to and from.
Yes.
Is there an argument to be made about we want biking to be accessible to all, even if we're not asking everyone to bike?
Well, so yeah, I have two thoughts on that. One is Ronald Reagan used to joke, everybody wants transit to get the other guys off the road. But if you can actually show that it gets the other guys off the road, then the drivers benefit, right? If it's reducing traffic, then drivers benefit too. The other thing would be, again, my impression of who rides their bike to work is going to be mostly white collar people who show up in their office building, has a gym and a shower. I think it's actually more compelling if you can make the case that better bike infrastructure results in helping people get a job. I mean, I just think of when I would drive around Montgomery County, my old county, it's the Langenkamp's county. On a Saturday, my kids would notice seeing a guy standing waiting for a bus. The buses in Montgomery County on the weekend run every 35 minutes. And I would explain, this is a lower income guy, probably an immigrant, and his commute takes so long, and he's probably often late for work because he can't afford a car. Conservatives want the immigrant who shows up here to be a self-starter, to have a job, to really pull himself up by the bootstraps. And the ability to get it to work is a hurdle. It's a barrier to entry, the term that economists use. And maybe you can save up $12,000 and buy a used car, but if we make it easier for people to get to work, then that is pro self-reliance. That is for the economy, but it's making sure the working class, the lower income people, the new immigrant can actually contribute to society and take care of himself without turning to the state for aid. So that's what I would think. If you can make the case convincingly that better bike infrastructure, better walkability infrastructure will help the lower class people really make it for themselves and get to work, then that's going to, I would think, convince conservatives.
Okay. And I'll say we did really well in the bipartisan infrastructure law, mostly thinking about safety in terms of that bipartisan support. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how we sort of pivot from safety to that quality of life, independence, self-reliance argument.
Yeah. Again, I mean, the two are obviously connected, because the reason in our old Montgomery County neighborhood, the reason my kids didn't bike much is just that my wife said, I don't want you trying to cross Randolph Road, which was 3 lanes in each direction. And then the county added an extra lane in each direction. There weren't, there just wasn't a place, they couldn't even get to the bike trails that exist in Montgomery County. And so I do think that, do you want your children to be able to safely get about, to build independence, to get to their friend's house, to get to the basketball court, to get to the Little League field, to get to school? Well, it's going to take better infrastructure to do that. And when that happens, your children will be happier, they'll be able to do more things, and you as parents won't be as stressed out. I mean, it sounds kind of funny, but a lot of the parents in the audience will know what we need is our children to be able to have fun without us having to hold their hand or drive them there. And especially, you know, once they're between 10 and 16 is when they need that. And it really does affect the quality of life. And so to point and say, look, the millennials are not having as many children. They're having one or they're having none, in part because they say it's too hard. Their life can be easier if their children are more free. Liberating children liberates parents. That requires safety and the ability to get around on their own.
Yeah. And then we had a question about, how about health reasons, combating obesity, improving health. We've even seen the argument that folks entering the service now are not, a lot of people don't make it because they're not in good enough physical shape to enter. And that we also see the services are seeing a lot of new recruits get injured because they weren't in decent enough physical shape when they joined.
No, I absolutely think there's an impression that a lot of the young people spend all their time playing video games and you know, doing staring at their cell phones, and to get people out more is absolutely going to be beneficial in those ways. I think it'll work with conservatives as much as it would work with liberals. There is definitely a concern about a lack of physical fitness, and the military angle is one I really hadn't thought of, and that could certainly be a case that this is a readiness issue. That hadn't occurred to me before.
Okay. And then I want to ask you one last question. I'm seeing a lot of comments about climate change, and you know, we hear you say don't bring that up. Is there a way that we can work around that, or that we can sort of tiptoe into the edge of that without turning our audience off? I
mean, I, for one, think about pollution, like the stuff that makes smog, the stuff that gives our kids asthma, the stuff that you know, in a downtown makes the buildings get, you know, dark colored stains. It's more local, and that's a way of doing it. That pollution would resonate in that way more than, you know, greenhouse gases. Also, reducing oil use, gasoline use is good for everybody. If your neighbors who really love bikes get to ride their bikes more, that's more gas for you. It brings down the price. It reduces oil, it reduces dependence. That's not as big of an issue since we have more fracking now, but certainly Russia controlling such a big part of the oil supplies can make people more sensitive to that. And so to step away from transportation, make a quick climate argument. I am a conservative, and that's not just policy positions. It's not just my personal life. It's sort of a philosophical approach. I see that when you have complex systems and you rapidly introduce change, it creates unintended consequences, and a lot of those are going to be bad. And so that's the reason that I care about climate. Is I say, if we're reaching unprecedented levels of greenhouse gas concentrations, I don't trust that the scientists know what's going to happen. I see headlines every day. Climate change is going to make your beer taste less good. Climate change is going to kill off the pileated woodpecker. Climate change is going to whatever. I don't believe that scientists know what it's going to do. What I believe is that we have no idea what it's going to do. And if it's a change that's big and sudden to a complex system, we ought to be wary. So that's my conservative case to worry about climate change. Less belief that, oh, well, science shows exactly what the consequences are going to be, because those headlines have been all over the place. And more, do you really want to continue to enter this uncharted territory of really high greenhouse gas concentrations and see what's next? Because change is scary to a conservative like me.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. We've got a number of thank yous in the Q&A. I think some of it was, this is a little bit difficult for me to hear, but I need to hear it, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Glad to have
Pleasure to be
you
here.
All right, so now I want to turn to our next speaker. Dan Lankenkamp is going to come and speak, and I think, so Dan is a U.S. diplomat. He's now a State Department fellow on Capitol Hill, but I think we've talked about him over the summit, or as the husband of Sarah Deben Lankenkamp. And so I just want to say thank you, Dan, for being here, for sharing your story and for all the advocacy that you've gotten involved with. And thanks for being here to say a few words.
Okay, great. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Karen. And I have to say, it's been such a pleasure to get to know you and all of the other bike advocates out there, people that are at the conference and all over the country. So, you know, Sarah and I are foreign service officers. That means that we're U.S. diplomats with the State Department, and we travel around the world working in U.S. embassies, you know, trying to protect America, trying to protect Americans, and promote our interests, whether it's, you know, helping Ukraine fight Russian aggression or helping promote democracy in Africa. You know, Sarah and I had done both of those things and worked pretty much all over the world in our careers. So just a little bit, you know, in that career, we work with Republicans and Democrats, regardless of who is heading the administration. That's an important part of who we are, to be kind of moderate, to be able to speak to both sides. So this is actually a nice panel for me to be on. I appreciate actually this opportunity. You know, of course, we also work not only with Republicans and Democrats, but we work with foreign governments all over the world who often vehemently disagree with the policies that we have. I worked in Iraq for a year in 2009. And I've worked, of course, in Africa, where we're trying to promote democracy, sometimes with governments that really don't really want democracy. That was a big issue when I was in Cote d'Ivoire. So as you mentioned, I'm in Congress now. I'm a fellow in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I should just note that I'm speaking today in my own private capacity, so don't take anything that I say as representing the Senate or Senator Menendez, who I work for, or anything like that. What is interesting about all of this work is that in government, you always are working with the political reality that you have. And you have to learn to speak, you know, in a way that can be understood by your interlocutor. So let me just transition and tell you about what happened to us. We had just moved back from Ukraine. Sarah and I were in Ukraine through the first part of the invasion. we were a number of, the small number of diplomats that did not evacuate when the war started, but instead worked from the border in Poland, trying to help the Ukrainians. So Sarah was in charge of a huge program to provide body armor, helmets, night vision goggles, and all kinds of equipment to the border guard and the police and other non-military security institutions. And I was the public affairs officer that was helping us get the word out about, what Russia was doing interviews with the press in Ukraine, and helping our ambassador, or the acting ambassador at the time, spread the word. So just organizing media interviews after media interview after media interview. We got back essentially in August, and just really weeks after arriving, we moved to Bethesda. And then days after just arriving in Bethesda, Sarah was riding her bike back from our kids' elementary school to the apartment where we were living, and she was struck and then crushed by a truck. She was riding in a bike lane, and this truck driver didn't see her. And, Karen, you showed a video of a biker getting basically sucked under the undercarriage of a semi truck yesterday. And I don't think Sarah got sucked under the truck because of a wind issue. I think this driver simply didn't see her. And as we all know, trucks turning right are incredibly, they make a lot of mistakes turning right because they often don't see in their blind spots. And it's clear to me that this trucker and this company that didn't train its trucker, acted irresponsibly, and killed her. This is obviously very painful for us, and it's totally changed my life. One of the interesting things about us was that we liked to bicycle simply because it was a nice way to get around. We were not advocates, but we really loved the sort of simplicity of it all. I think what Tim says about having a family where you live in a place where you can have your kids roam freely, safely, it really speaks to me, because that's the kind of neighborhoods that we had always sought out when we had the choice. And, we were looking forward to living in Bethesda, where there were bike routes where we could do this. And I think that, this whole episode to me just speaks about how the challenges that we have as a country in trying to make our, live up to the vision that we have of ourselves. I mean, that even I think Democrats and Republicans believe is possible for our country, a place where we can live and let our kids run freely, and where we can get around on foot or bike or whatever. So, to me, Sarah's death is really it's not only about the rights that she had to ride and use the roads, it's also about the kind of lifestyle that we are trying to achieve. So let me talk a little bit about the law that we're trying to get passed. Soon after Sarah died, I started reaching out to members of Congress. I spoke with Congressman Raskin. Congressman Blumenauer also reached out to us, or I reached out to him. I can't remember how it worked. It's all a little bit of a blur. And in this conversation, he said, I really, I want to try to do something, and I have an idea for a law, and I'd like to name it after Sarah. So this law, and I apologize if you all know about it, or this bill will create a legislative fix, just a small fix to the highway safety infrastructure program. And essentially, it will eliminate the matching funds that are necessary for communities to use now, so that they can build safe biking and pedestrian infrastructure. Now that, as you all know, the matching funds that are necessary for communities are a real stumbling block to creating this safe infrastructure. So this bill will essentially eliminate the matching fund requirement. It'll allow them to use not only highway safety improvement program funds, but it'll also allow them to use the HSIP funds for transportation alternatives. By eliminating this matching fund, it really opens up the billions of dollars, $6 or $8 billion a year that will go to this kind of infrastructure. Now, we're talking about how to sell this to not only Democrats, but also to Republicans. And we're really hoping that this bill has bipartisan interest. And let me tell you about our strategy so that you tomorrow can go and speak to people about maybe using these points if you find them appealing. I mean, I should say from the outset, one of the ways that we are getting Republican support is we are really leveraging all of the connections that we have with our Republican friends. And, you know, as bike advocates, I think that that's important for us. I don't think we can remain siloed in our pro-bike liberal enclaves in this discussion. We have to speak to people that drive cars, as Tim said. We have to reach out to our communities and explain to them that this is really about lifestyle. This is really about a vision of the future that in many ways is conservative. It's the kind of, you know, place we're trying to build, the kind of places that I grew up in. I grew up riding my bike all over the city that I grew up in, which was Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it was safe. And that's the kind of place I would like to have for my kids. But to get back to this point about relationships, you need to build them. And, you know, if I had a criticism of our movement, it's that we spend too much time talking to each other and not trying to build relationships with people that are outside of the pro-bike movement. I would say another thing. One thing that we're going to try to do here is explain this bill in terms that are important in Congress right now. One key thing is that this bill is revenue neutral. It's not going to cost the government anything to implement this fix. It's simply going to open up funds that already exist. That's obviously important in Congress right now because we're in a budgetary environment that is very, very different than it was a year ago. And then I would say as well that, you know, one of the main, and Tim, you can tell me if you think this is wrong, but one of the main arguments of the conservative movement in America is that the federal government has too much power, and that power should be devolved to states and to local governments. Well, this bill is going to give communities more control because they will be able to access these funds without without having to get, having the Department of Transportation, it's going to give them more access to these funds. So, and that means not only cities and large towns, but it also means small towns in rural America. And that could be pivotal because the small towns have the least amount of money, the least amount of capacity to put up matching funds for these programs. So there's two important arguments that you should remember. They don't have to put up matching funds, gives communities more control over the way that they're going to look and feel in the future. Those are just great things. It also plays to this whole idea of communities being given choices about the way that they look. I don't want to blather on. I hope this is helpful. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
All right, thanks, Dan. Really appreciate that. I think we folks are getting ready to go into to talk with other folks from their states about lobbying. So it's really helpful to hear the strategy and to remember those key points, that this is about letting local governments do their safety priorities and get those done, and to be able to make it affordable for them to do it. Thank you again for being here. Dan's also gonna join our congressional briefing tomorrow from 3 to 4, and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again for all of your support, and we're thinking of you.
Thank you, Karen.
All right, I'm going to get going. Please join your state meetings. There's a discussion in the community on HUVA if you have any lobby day questions. Thanks, everybody.